This is Sofia Smallstorm. I am welcoming today a guest that I haven't had on my podcast before, and he is Jamie Lee. He is actually quite versatile. He has, as I have, gone into many different directions. So our discussion today may take different paths and byways, but I think you'll find it very interesting. So welcome, Jamie. How are you?
I'm great, Sophia. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, of course, it's my pleasure. We've had some very good talks, and I have listened to a few of your shows as well with the Sage of Quay, and I think you've plumbed a lot of material. And you put out more posts on your website than anyone. They're like flooding in all day long. So tell us your website.
Well, I have three websites, and I started the first one back, I think, in 2010 called Taboo, TABU blog. It stands for Towards a Better Understanding, tabublog.com, and it's a general kind of what's going on in the world. My second site is called A Plane, Plane, truth.info. And that deals more with the recent subject of flat Earth and our heliocentric versus geocentric history. And then I have a smaller one for vaccines. It's called AVV, Apple Victor Victor Ida.info, Anderson Valley Vaccine Information. And it's just a general information about what's in vaccines and up to date on all the vaccine information. So it's just trying to get the word out and inform people. And I spent 25 years working on Wall Street in finance. And last 10 years, I've just been reading and studying and really trying to figure out why the world can't get any better and why we can't fix things. And even though everybody wants peace in the world, why we can't have peace. And just started getting into the rabbit hole like you have. And the layers of the onion got so much bigger than I ever dreamed of. And here I am, 10 years later, and we're still finding new discoveries like we're going to talk about today.
Jamie, I never worked on Wall Street, so tell me what that was like. Tell me, first of all, what did you do? What did you do? Did you do the same thing? Did you do different things? Who did you work for, and what was it like?
I started in 1985 in the New York Stock Exchange as a clerk for a relatively small investment banking firm called Furman Sells, Mager, Dietz, and Burney in New York City. And so I worked down on the floor for a year learning how trades work. And very interesting sidebar quickly, the first few days of trading, one of the senior partners brought me up to the seventh floor bar after the close of the stock exchange and gave me some advice about how Wall Street works. And he's holding his scotch and like he's held it every day since he's been to work there after work, and said, "Son, teach you a couple things about Wall Street. You got to know. In Wall Street, you either pray or you're prey. You pray or you pray, P-R-E-Y, or you pray, P-R-A-Y. And then the second thing he said is you need to know is that in Wall Street, you're either at the table or you're on the table." And, I grew up in competitive sports, and so getting into Wall Street was kind of a natural fit in competition. But when I realized as I worked further into the trading, I was an institutional sales trader in New York, and then I moved to San Francisco in 1991 and worked for a firm called Robertson Coleman Stevens Investment Banking, which became Robertson Stevens Investment Banking, which got sold to First Boston, and I think Bank America absorbed them later. But we were doing all the four horsemen that were doing all the technology, healthcare, Wi-Fi build out, all those kind of things in Silicon Valley. We were based in San Francisco. So we were at the cutting edge of a lot of the new technologies coming out. So I got a lot of experience with initial public offerings and seeing a lot of new companies. We brought Genentech public and some of these other companies. And so I got to see a lot of the insiders. But until I started investigating for myself about how the world really works and who's behind the scenes, I never really understood the dynamics of money. And one thing I understood after I got out of Wall Street is our debt is we're in a one world government. And the way we know that is our debt goes with us everywhere around the world. Wherever you go in the world, your debt will follow you, except for three countries. And I wonder, Sophia, you can name those three countries where it's not bank. There's called the Bank of International Settlement in Geneva, Switzerland, run by the Rothschilds, who are also the bankers to the Vatican, and all banks, including the United States Federal Reserve, which is a private corporation, clear their finances every day through the Bank of International Settlement, except for 3 countries. And I wonder if you could name those 3 countries.
I don't want to test. I know about BIS, BIS. So I would guess one is
Right.
North Korea.
North Korea, Syria, and Iran.
Yeah, I was going to say Syria, and then of course we have Ahmadinejad and all of his government. So those seem to make the most sense. And is it true that the axis of evil that Bush named way back were the 6 countries that didn't settle through BIS?
You're exactly right. The other 3 were Libya. I forget the exact 6, but Libya, Afghanistan, and Iraq were previously on that list. So you can see what's happening in world events and why it's happening, to get everybody under a centralized banking system before we go to a no currency electronic monetization, if you want to call it that. And we're well on our way to that now. So when I got in out of Wall Street and I started looking at the whole capitalist capitalizing system and realized that the 10% that controlled the world wealth was going to get down to 1%. And we're past that now. And we're seeing the ramifications of printing money at interest, which the Federal Reserve private banking makes. I think they made $77 billion printing money at interest in 2012 profits for the U.S. government. And we're under this system of absolute control. And I just moved to the country back in 2007 because I wanted to start growing my own food, knowing where food came from. I wanted to give my son a life where he knew where things came from. He could grow his own food, our own water, our own energy. So we've been living on a ranch, growing our own food and just trying to be self-sufficient and self-reliant and not have as big a carbon footprint, because I realized once I decided when my son was born in 2005 that I needed to see a better way than destruction of Earth at all costs for profit. And we just moved to a farm so we could grow our own food and live self-sufficiently. And I just started really getting into world events and realizing that the control system has been in place for a very long period of time, and that the powers that be use deception, subliminal programming through our screens, our social devices, to set memes in our minds. But on the other hand, there's this whole shadow government, other world that you and I have been exposing now for years, that the world is waking up to. And it's very exciting times. It's very scary times, but it's also very exciting times.
Now, Jamie, I'm just going to mention to listeners that I'm hearing a little bit of a speech pattern thing going on, which could be your computer, but every few words, some word will drag a little bit, and I think that is your current internet connection doing that through Skype. So he doesn't have a speech defect, because the guy rattles on like blazes when I talk to him otherwise. So today's recording has this little bit of a glitch going on. But anyway, so you've given us your background. That's very nice. I'm happy that you came from the belly of the beast and saw fit to change your evil ways. That was a little joke. I hope you were amused. So we are going to talk about what you are seeing in Northern California there, which is this phenomenon that in polite company we call it geoengineering. In our company we call it chemtrails. You have been really researching this now. I believe you've got a book out on it. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. So I met a man named Dane Wigington in 2005 up in Mount Shasta when I decided to homestead, and I wanted to get out of the Wall Street life, get out of debt, cash out, and just get a ranch and try and figure out a better world for all. And he turned me on to a book that I have right here that I ordered called Policy Implications of Greenhouse Warming. It's a 1992 book. It's 700 pages or so, 898 pages. And it's all about mitigation, adaptation, and the science base of greenhouse warming. It's written by the National Academy of Scientists, all the top scientists in 1992, addressing all the issues that would be coming forward about greenhouse gases, a warming Earth, they've been on this for a very long time, and I found it just extremely interesting that they were addressing issues that was on nobody's radar screen, but this one person was telling me about, and seeing a book presenting the cases and including findings and recommendations. They included low stratospheric aerosol spraying, cloud stimulation, stratospheric dust, space mirrors. So they were considering this problem of Earth warming up significantly due to anthropogenic man-made activities. And I just started looking up in the sky and seeing trails that were not dissipating like contrails were supposed to do, and I'd always thought and never thought twice about it. And just over the past, that was 2005, we're in 2017, so 12 years, it's just increased exponentially to the point now over the past year, the skies are almost permanently being sprayed. And I've just, for that many time, I've been investigating geoengineering, chemtrails, and this new discovery we're going to talk about here about wet surface air cooling from ground-based weather modification devices. It's just been a rabbit hole that just doesn't end. But the bottom line I've come to, Sophia, just in this recently, is that weather has been modified for decades because we've destroyed the environment that is basic weather through our polluting ways, through coal, through cars, through airplanes, through all our emissions, that has caused the weather, and specifically rain, to not be able to formulate. The rain vapors, it's called CCN, cloud condensating nuclei, are not able to form because of all the particulate matter that has gone up into the sky has destroyed the ability to make rain. And so what I'm just coming to the conclusion over the past actually few weeks is that our weather systems have been absolutely geoengineered completely for decades now. And they're at a point now where you and I were talking the other day about how they're having to use pulsating NEXRAD systems, which we'll get into, to actually stimulate the weather systems. And they've created a new term here in California, which we went from 5 years of the greatest drought in the history of California, followed the exact next year, this year, of the greatest rains and greatest snow in the history of California. And they described it as the atmospheric river, a brand new type of weather pattern that came into the Northern California and Southern California as well, and just dumped copious amounts of rain to set record events. And we found the systems now that they're using to create this atmospheric river that has never been used in weather before. So it's being altered when they have to come up with new names for clouds and new names for weather conditions that are beyond describable in other times. And it's all been through weather modification, because our environment has literally been destroyed by man's continuing endless consumption that pollutes into the air, and there's been no accountability about our lifestyles.
Jamie, do you believe that we have released too much CO2, and that is the fundamental reason that the weather has been altered? Do you really believe that?
Well, not necessarily CO2s, but I was just going through the numbers of what we have been throwing into the air. I mean, if you get into coal specifically, because coal generation has been going on for 120 years, and coal-fired plants have caused pollutants, combustion releases, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, mercury, and dozens of other substances known to be hazardous to human life. The Clean Air Act grandfathered in these coal plants, and a very interesting story came out last week where England had the first ever coal-free day in over 110 years. At the end of 2012, there were 1,300 coal-fired plants, 557 in the United States alone, 6,683 worldwide. And it's amazing how much pollutant just these coal fly ash gets up into the air and mixes in with the clouds, creating a disturbance in the ability to make rain. And that's just coal-fired plants. Now you get into power plants, and according to Weather Wars 101, there's 62,500 power plants operating around the world. Four of the largest plants, the world's 10 largest plants, are in China, and all four of those plants began in the last 13 years. So these pollutants are causing air particulate matter to go up. I mean, every day we're just pumping this stuff into the air. It says here that coal has caused every year 13,200 premature deaths, 9,700 hospitalizations, and 20,000 heart attacks. Yeah,
Never believe their statistics, number one. Never. They change them however they want to present their message. But number two, to take you back to something you said just a few minutes ago, that the pollution or the weather interference has stopped the ability of the earth to make natural rain. What you're really saying is natural rainfall. Because this
correct.
particulate matter that is supposedly rooted in pollution comes from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. The atmospheric scientist Daniel Rosenfeld made a pronouncement many years ago. The headlines were "Pollution Stops Rain." And he found that in areas where there was industry, the fine size of the particulate matter caused condensation to be very, very fine droplets that were stable rather than unstable. So unstable droplets are rain. Stable droplets are haze. And this was the beginning of the chemtrail theory, in my opinion. It could have preceded that, the work on it, but this was the public overt announcement that led to the practice of creating artificial particulate spraying that would then cause condensation around the particulates. This is how raindrops form anyway. They form from salt or dust that is airborne. And if you reduce the size of the particulate, you will reduce the size of the droplet that forms around it as it brings to itself atmospheric moisture, because the particulate has to have an affinity for moisture. So the natural rain has been changed because there have been loads of particulates deliberately sprayed that are finer than dust and salt. And these fine particulates create haze that then has to be destabilized by the next rad. So they have to, just as you say, stimulate the haze in order to create clusters of droplets to form clouds and then destabilize the clouds. I'm sure they use electromagnetic waves as well to destabilize those clouds. And they cause rainfall. They can concentrate rainfall. This is how they create floods. And this is what Weather War is very good at. He's very good at analyzing. If you go to Weather War 101, you will see he's right on top of all of the storms and the floods. And this is what interferes with the comfort and security of life. You can't live in a city that has been flooded and you're flooded out of your house. Now, I know I'm talking a lot, but I just want to clarify another thing. You have mentioned that the coal-fired plants are releasing pollution, and it's the pollution particulates that Rosenfeld theorized are causing lack of rainfall around industrial areas. But Weather War has said very clearly they are not polluting per se. They are releasing enormous quantities of steam. He uses the tea kettle analogy. They are tea kettles, those towers that are pumping out what looks like white fumes. That's not fumes, that is steam. And he is theorizing that water generation, that expulsion of water into the air, is what provides the atmospheric environment of moisture to form the geoengineered haze or clouds. Does that make sense? Is that what you have found with your WSAC research?
Yes, and you, what I'm understanding now, Sophia, is that it's an entire world system to modify to create weather literally around the world. I mean, it's weather modified around the world. There's no natural weather anymore that I'm understanding, and it's a combination of aerosol spraying and these wet surface air coolers, WSACs on the ground. It's the barium that they spray. We know that the chemtrails are sprayed with aluminum, barium, and strontium. And I always focused on the aluminum aspects of the reflecting of sunlight back into space to keep the earth cool. But I started looking into the barium salts, and that's what you just said, is salt is part of the equation in making rain. And so I learned that the barium salt is being sprayed because they're combined with the water vapor that comes out of these water surface air coolers. And as you and I were talking about earlier, I mean, they use tens of thousands of gallons of water per minute that vaporizes into the air. I mean, these water surface air coolers are everywhere around the world. They're on ships. They're in on oil rigs. They're on land, and they're portable. They're on the back of trucks and whatnot. And they're also in the nuclear power plants, and they're used to actually modify the water vapors, as I understand it, go up and mix with the barium salts and create this CCN, cloud condensation nuclei, which is a very, very small molecule, and they have to make it bond with the water vapor and create the right humidity and the right temperature, because as air goes up, it cools. But the problem we're having now with the desertification of the earth and everything warming up is it's creating these tropical rains, and you probably saw it down there in San Diego, up here about an hour north of San Francisco. And our rains now are tropical. All of a sudden, these sheets of rain just come down. It's not like a storm rolls in with the fog off the coast. We don't get fog anymore. We have no longer fog seasons here in Northern California. We used to have them all the time. We just went through another spring without fog. And now we're having these rains, these tropical rains out of nowhere, just drop sheets down. So what they're doing is they're dropping the false ionosphere to create a lower ceiling. And these weather now, this atmospheric river they created starting in Hawaii with the wet surface air coolers, and then using ships, the silver lining, Bill Gates' silver lining aerosol weather modifiers, cooling vapors coming out of ships, and then it hits the coast, and they have more on the coast, and created this stream of atmospheric river. And it was just unlike anything I'd ever seen in 60 years of living in California. I'd never seen the type of weather we're having now. So yes, it's a full combination. It's massive water being vaporized into the sky, combining with the titanium salts to create the cloud condensation nuclei. And then they use the NEXRAD, which stands for Next Generation Radar, and also Doppler, these round golf ball size devices, radar devices you see in a lot of places. And they use either pulsating or stimulating frequencies, radio frequencies, once the weather systems are in place to steer the weather as it comes onto the coast where they want it. And they can direct it direct it north, south. You can see that on Weather Wars 101, and Dutch Sense has some great weather directing. Even Geoengineering Watch is now showing ground-based weather modification systems. And so when they come on land, they use these NEXRAD systems to steer the weather wherever they want to do it using pulsating systems. And it's just amazing how it's done worldwide. You see it all around the world happening.
Let's do a little review of how they can mess with civilization and culture as it already exists with their weather systems. So as I understand, and you can correct me or refine what I'm saying, the mixture of aerosols that are sprayed by what look like planes, this goes on in many areas of the world on a very regular basis, and people are getting accustomed to seeing the cross hatchings in the sky. In fact, these are the backgrounds now of many movies and advertisements, and all kinds of television programs are decorated with chemtrails. They've even gone back into old movies and put chemtrail skies, or the white sky instead of the blue sky with the puffy clouds, in outdoor scenes. It's really incredible. So anyway, that is part of it. The spraying of the aerosols, the mixtures in the aerosols, the pH of those mixtures ultimately descends on the ground, and that will alter the composition of the soil, the nature of the soil. So if soil is acidic, they can alkalinize it by spraying above it and then having that material descend with the rain into the soil. So they will forcibly change crops and types of crops, and they will change the farming that's possible based on what they spray on that region from the sky. So this will bankrupt farmers who are used to growing certain kinds of crops, will not be able to grow them anymore because the pH is wrong in the soil, and they will have to switch. And it takes, generations to learn how to grow a different crop properly. And if you start backsliding in your yield, you're going to go out of business. You're going to go bankrupt. So what I believe is going to happen is, as they desertify and change the pH and wash the topsoil away with these sheets of rain, which is what they're doing, they will then have their big farming companies like Monsanto and Conagra and Syngenta come in and buy the land for pennies on the dollar, because the farmers who farm that land, the generational family farmers and the smaller farmers will have gone out of business. And then we're going to get vast numbers of GMO crops introduced, crops that are drought tolerant, crops that grow under certain conditions or other conditions, and the public will accept this new kind of farming because everybody will concede that we have to eat. So it's better that we have crops, even if they're genetically modified, than no crops.
Well, it's worse than that. I mean, Monsanto, who just got bought by Bayer, which is creating the pharmacology company from hell, has a heavy metal seed that they developed, I think it was back in 2011, for that exact reason. As you know, in the Central Valley here, the farmers during the drought, Central Valley farmers, which is 40% of the U.S. food supply, they were cut off on their water supplies down to less than 5% of their normal allotment. And just last year, they agreed to a severe cut in water rationing, and then all of a sudden the water comes back, and now they're stuck on these lower levels, and they're trying to get their levels ramped back up. So there's clearly a war on farmers. There's organic, natural farmers, particularly. I have a small farm, one of less than 3% left in the country, and they're making it very hard for us to grow our own food and to sell it. And then when you add all the aluminum and everything that's been dumped on us into the soil, there's no natural food anymore. It's all been synthesized. And so as the food stops growing, the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper just 2 weeks ago had a 5-page pullout section on synthetic meats. And it was talking about all the different types of synthetic meats that Silicon Valley down the road is coming up with. And I do an hour-long presentation on my YouTube channel, plaintruth.info, on bioengineered nanofoods. Nanoparticulate matter in foods is a $40 billion food business that nobody even knows about. It's much worse than GMOs. These nanoparticulate matters go in through your blood-brain barrier. There's no testing on this. The FDA and the USDA they use an advisory capacity. Nanotechnology is a $1 trillion business, completely off everybody's radar. And I try and get people to try and understand how advanced technology is that we're not told about. And I go all the way back to Nikola Tesla. He had free energy back in 1910. This has all been a game that they've been playing on us and now they got Rex Tillerson, the head of Exxon, is now the Secretary of State. And we've had the answers to solve the world's problems for so long, except capitalism will not let it come to the forefront because control has to be made, not the betterment of mankind and life on Earth. And that's what really got me scared on Wall Street to get out of it, was they were going to profit all the way to the end because you make the most money on the way out as things get more scarce. So they create these false scarcities, like they did about oil in 2007 when oil got up to $147 a barrel and we're paying $5, $6 a gallon. Remember that? And then within a year, the prices had dropped down under $30 a barrel. So they control all of the markets. They control the whole game. And they've been aerosol spraying since the 1900s. I mean, if you go back to the timeline of creating weather, I go back to Tesla, and then 1953, Wilhelm Reich created the Orgon cloudbuster, and he showed, actually Reich was a student of Sigmund Freud back in Vienna, very interesting man. And he created the orgonite to excite the plasma field in the clouds and was able to create rain. And then 2 years later, the FBI arrested him, put him in jail, and he died in jail 2 years later. And then in 1960, Bernard Vonnegut, Kurt Vonnegut's brother, added silver iodine to clouds to start effectively doing effective cloud seeding for rain. And they used that extensively in the Vietnam War for the Tet Offensive and others to flood out the enemy. And then Weather Wars gets into the Mount Zion study in 1971, using the wet surface air cooling systems they were developing to use these massive water vapor technology to steer the weather. And since then, it's hard to find any studies about ground-based weather modification devices, yet you go in anywhere and look up wet seal air coolers, and you'll find just lists and lists, and there's like a Home Depot for wet sale. They're everywhere. And so we've been modifying weather for a very, very long time. And I don't know. It's just we've been just one more thing just on the economy. I mean, not many people know it, but there's 6 guys in England every morning that set the price of gold. Our whole systems are being controlled. And so back to the farming and food, by synthesizing the food, they control the people. Kissinger, I don't know if he said it or not, but it's a famous quote of his, control the food, control the people. And that's exactly what you're referring to, is they're able to control our entire food systems, and nobody knows where our food comes from anymore. And what's worse, nobody seems to even care. So
Jamie,
I don't know where we go from here.
They don't care. I mean, the successive generations are going to care even less because they're so immersed in artifice. And I was watching, I'm going to post this on my blog. I was watching a guy on YouTube. His name is Og, like the first 3 letters of August, Tellez, Tellez. And he was a ritual abuse victim as a child. His knowledge of what goes on in these projects, as he calls them, is really extensive, and it's very profound. And he says that this brain-machine interface that they're planning, some call it AI, is actually a vampiric, foreign, interdimensional energy that they are really plopping all over the planet in every imaginable way. They are selling biology off to artificial intelligence, which is it's an evil vampiric consciousness. It's something in and of itself. It's not just technology. It's part of a whole spirit. And I found this very interesting. And when you say that the nano foods will invade and cross the blood-brain barrier, that is exactly what they want. They want, through nanomaterials, to control, to get through all membranes and barriers in the body that are very sensitively designed biologically in order to keep certain things out and keep certain things in. The junctions of the cells in these membranes are intelligent in their flexing and modulation, and they're controlled by a very intelligent system that we call the immune system. But they want to get through the blood-brain barrier with their nano foods and their nanoparticles and their everything else that they transfer into us by way of vaccines or even environmental substances that we're inhaling. They want these to get in our bodies because they want to cross the blood-brain barrier for the brain-machine interface. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes more than sense. And I did a 3-hour documentary. It's Target Humanity, Touchless Torture, and it gets into all the smart dust that I think you brought up a few years ago, and some other people that this whole smart dust. And I started looking into the nanoparticulate matter that's included in the geoengineering. It's a whole nother avenue. It's a whole nother venue of discussion getting into smart dust. And what I found was the nanoparticulate matter is so small. Like when you talk about a nanoparticulate matter, they describe it as 1/80,000th of a width of a hair. They have the technology to manipulate these nanoparticulate matters, and through the aerosol spraying, and it enters through our lungs and enters through our cells in our body and our food systems, they're able to use what they call self-replicating nanobots that can actually assemble inside our system and into our nervous system, and they can use Wi-Fi, logarithmic computers, the geoengineering skies to create radio wireless frequencies and alter your nervous system. And then they have the blood-brain barrier gets up into the brain, and they have neurosynapse replacers that go in between your hemispheres of your brain, and they can interrupt the communication of their brain. They can read your thoughts. They can change your images. They can voice over or lay over dreams of horrific dreams so you never get sleep. There's a wonderful book called Soul Catcher by Dr. Duncan, Robert Duncan, I believe, and he used to work on a lot of these projects. And this is a whole nother discussion about what is being the aerosol spraying operations. It's very complex, but it's very advanced. And again, the technology, if you think flying in a plane that you can get your Wi-Fi, you can download your Wi-Fi and get whatever you want to upload on a plane now, traveling at 500 miles an hour. Well, what do you think DARPA and the military has had for 25, 50 years? So we're under attack. This whole world of people are under attack by whether they're other world entities, whether they're mind control parasites or black goo, as some's referred to them as. The whole genetic modification of humans, the children these days, they're synthetic beings now. They're eating artificial foods, they're breathing artificial air, they're being modified. Now, whether, the discussion is whether this being done deliberately or not, I absolutely am convinced it's being done deliberately because, as I understand, and you brought up the word spirit, which is wonderful because that's what we need to start talking about, is they don't want us to incarnate. They don't want our spirits to keep on. They want to end and leave us in this material dense form without our spirits being able to stay alive, our souls. And this is literally about technology overcoming man. And I think, you get into what's that gentleman's name that did the Roy Kurzweil, who's working with Google now about the future of man.
Ray Kurzweil, yes. And I want to add here that a note I took from the Og Telez YouTube I was watching yesterday. AI is a vampiric consciousness bound into the supercomputer system. A vampiric consciousness that is bound into the supercomputer system. Now just think about that. Think about that. This Ray Kurzweil and all this Google geek stuff is not human favoring. It is a different kind of consciousness. It's a different kind of spirit. And it's embodied in this brain-machine interface, artificial intelligence, supercomputers, technology. I mean, this guy says that when they do, ritual abuse to children, they actually map the minds of both the recipient and the perpetrator, and they map out with technology how the brain is registering the experience respectively. How is the recipient registering it? How is the perpetrator registering it? And these observations are to see who is strongest, who can hold together, what the reaction on human, I don't know what to call it. It's the human soul that they are interested in converting to, I guess you could use the word evil, to the nature of this vampiric supercomputer consciousness. And the sad thing for me is, Jamie, you and I are going to be left behind. We will die, and it is the successive generations that have to take up the cause, so to speak, but they're not going to, because they're already being indoctrinated and enculturated in the enjoyment of these technologies. We were never taught this much about technology such that we couldn't live without it. I mean, many of us are addicted now, but we didn't grow out of that technology the way the kids are growing out of it today.
Right, and they're being indoctrinated thinking that technology is normal. You push a button and things show up. And I want to just emphasize what you're saying, even make it even clearer. If you Google brain mapping and the money spent on brain mapping, and brain mapping is specifically studying between our ears and behind our eyes, they spend billions and billions and billions of dollars every year for decades and decades studying how our brain works. And what do you think all these PhDs and the top scientists around the world, U.S. Navy intelligence, what do you think they learned about human behavior? And so I believe they've had this long-term plan, 50 years or more. Google was created like Google, part of the black goo. And their D-Wave computers is what you're speaking of, these high capacity logarithmic computers that can process this data to determine exactly what you're talking about. Who is stronger between these two? Which are their top qualities of the brain mapping they've done? And so we all have our IP frequencies. We all resonate at a different vibrational frequency. And so every single person around the world can be controlled by these technologies. But what I found really interesting, and this is kind of a little sidebar, but it's a little theory of mine, why they're bringing medical marijuana, or Kmart cannabis, I'm calling it, around the world. I mean, Mexico, Ireland, Australia, United States, all at the exact same time are suddenly approving medical marijuana. Well, one, cancer rates are going up 70% by 2030, according to the World Health Organization. But the sidebar is that some of these mind control victims, like these Taylor Bryce and the other ladies were presidential models. Transformation is one of Transformation of America is one of their books, but they talk about how they were programmed not to smoke marijuana, and if they did, they were instantly supposed to hurt themselves or something, because they found that when you smoked marijuana, you went into a higher frequency that could not be controlled as easily through their wireless technology. So I'm theorizing that possibly this new Kmart cannabis medical marijuana is to get people, smoking, but keep their frequencies lower, so that worldwide control through wireless technology and these supercomputers and geoengineering, and they've got everybody as slave robots. They can control them, and this is called the hive mentality, the beehive, which they've talked about, I'm sure you're aware, for 20, 30 years, about linking every human brain to form a supercomputer that they control. And I believe that's what the intention is they're doing it so fast now, you can just see it in real time.
Yeah, Jamie, I mean, when you put it together like that, it is very possible that that's what's happening. And I mean, I say all the time, our only recourse is that we'll slide out of this before what we imagine to be the worst happens. And there are all kinds of levels beyond that that we can't even imagine. But
Right.
this issue of possible reincarnation, like, who needs it? Thank you, but no thank you, you know? But I don't mean that we should quit doing what we're doing and we should just, shrug and say, well, there's nothing we can do. Because the state of living, I'm reading a book now by a psychologist called Warren Grossman. I'm trying to see what the title is. To be Healed by the Earth. And I'm just going to pull a quote from it, if you can give me a second.
Sure.
It's really a remarkable book. Somebody sent it to me recently, and I was just sitting around, and I picked it up the other night, and I started to read it, and I thought, wow.
Can you say the name of the book again?
To be Healed by the Earth, Warren Grossman, PhD. Now, Warren Grossman was a psychologist. This is back in 1973. He was very successful. He took a vacation with his wife. They lived in Cleveland. I guess the vacation was 1986. It was cold. So they went to Brazil. They went to Rio, and they had a great time. And they came back, and he discovered that he had acquired a parasite that was embedded in his liver, and he got very, very sick. So he had a terrible, terrible time for a long time, and his energy came back very slowly, and he then began to take himself out to the backyard when he started to get out of bed, and I think he was sick for, I don't know, months and months. He said, when I was strong enough to get out of bed, it was summertime and beautiful. Each day I would slowly drag myself outdoors and lie on the ground instead of the bed. It was then that my perception began to change. It became apparent to me that the earth was very much alive, that I lay on an earthly bed, glowing a beautiful shade of blue and flowing with tangible energy. I would stare at the oak trees, and I could see their gold energy coursing the length of their trunks. I realized that these huge organisms were as large and vital as whales. A year after the illness began, I was finally able to walk to the corner of the street. Although I was pitifully weak and terribly haggard, I wanted to engage again in life as it used to be. So he began to walk on the earth. He did it barefoot. And I understand about earthing and grounding. I know a lot about that. But what he started to say, which I think is pretty magical, is that trees are columns growing from the earth, and they're really drawing the earth's energy up and out and releasing the earth's energy into the air. Human beings are columnal as well. We stand on the earth, and as we walk, if you think about your feet, how they walk on the ground, forget about shoes and boots and all that stuff. But your bare feet on the ground, you have so many bones in your feet, and you have all these muscles, and you're receiving the energy of the earth, and that is making you move. The lovely rotation, the rolling of your foot, you're really drawing the earth's energy up and through you. And I started to look at the earth differently as a consequence of beginning to read this book. And that's what we're losing, Jamie. We're losing the connection with this entire system that we're in that is so organic and so life nourishing, and everything around us is becoming fragmented and split by technology. For instance, these false stupidity flag things that they have now, like Times Square, all these scenarios, these events where cars are mowing people down. This is to bring in driverless cars, you know? And everybody's going to say, oh, yeah, we have to have driverless cars because look at what people do once they get behind the wheel. They might just decide to drive on the sidewalk and mow a bunch of people down. And so everything is going to be yielded over and conceded to the control of this giant grid and giant computer system, even our free will.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I got one of your devices, a grounding device, and we've talked about grounding. And just a sidebar, I was listening to your Paul is Dead podcast with Mike Williams at Sage Aquay, which was excellent. And I didn't hear if you got into it or not, but I did some research and found that the whole Beatles songs were written by the Tavistock Institute. But when they, in the 1960s, preface this, Earth resonates at something like 8.48 hertz. The ionosphere is 8.58, and we resonate like 8.54. We're a battery. The Earth is a battery. It's electromagnetic. And when you have rubber under your feet, you're disconnected from the Earth battery. I mean, I look at us as antennas. We're upright antennas. We're supposed to bring the cosmos of spirit down to the earthly realm. That's one of our roles, and that's why we're upright, as I see it. Trees as well, bringing consciousness down from the earth, the heavenly realms, down to earth consciousness. I mean, we're only using less than 15% of our brain. So by they came out with Converse and Keds in early 1960s, late 1950s. And that rubber disconnected us from earth consciousness. And I believe there's been a deliberate dumbing down process by getting us to wear rubber shoes. And so on the ranch for the last 3 years, I started walking around barefoot, and my whole consciousness changed. And I can't say it was directly because of that, but I had a much better feeling of well-being, of connectedness to the earth. I became more involved with earth's rhythms and patterns, which our just-in-time food inventory doesn't do anymore. We don't know the seasons of food. And so we're greatly disconnected from earth energy and earth's consciousness. And it totally makes sense exactly what you're just saying. It's by design that they're trying to get our souls and take our consciousness away from us. So we'll just be slaves to the system, and the technology will own us. And then they just turn us over to computers, and they own 7 billion people without them even knowing it. That's what's so crazy about this agenda I'm seeing. And then all the stuff you're seeing with all these stupid false flags that are so obvious, but people take them at face value because all they do is read headlines and assume that the world's getting crazier, when in fact it's just a bunch of psyops to create this world they want us to fall into and accept. It's by design.
I'm going to read again from chapter 10, Energy Anatomy, because this is so incredibly wonderful. So, the energy of life is the bedrock of reality. Anatomy and psychology are two different scholarly perspectives from which to view the energy of life. When this energy manifests as matter, we call it the physical body. When we feel the movement of the energy, we call it emotion. When we pay attention to its content, we call it thought. The human being is a flowing, cylinder-shaped system of energy that connects at its bottom to the energy of the earth. The principal energy function of the feet and legs is to access the earth's energy. This is done by connecting the person to the earth and then spontaneously drawing the earth's energy upward through the body. Under natural conditions, people walk without shoes or with little foot covering. When this occurs, the feet, and especially the toes, are used in a dynamic and vigorous way that easily pumps energy upwards. It is not that shoes prevent this, but the constraining shape of most shoes prevents this. In addition, having learned to walk in such shoes usually immobilizes the natural form of feet and reduces the movement of the foot muscles and connective tissue. Even though somewhat reduced in civilized people, the earth's energy still flows upward through the feet and legs. Once the energy reaches the bottom of the spine, it is relayed upward through a series of 7 vortices of energy, which are called chakras. This is a Sanskrit word with no English equivalent. Each chakra's task is to create and then distribute the appropriate frequency of energy to all nearby body parts. As energy is consciousness, each chakra is characterized by a certain form of intelligence. Now, I have to say, I used to be in the world of running. I worked for New York City Marathon, New York Roadrunners Club. I worked at athletic shoe stores. This was back in my 20s. And I have seen the morphology of athletic shoes. I began to not be able to run in the modern running shoe because it was like a moon boot. I remember running on the Nike Waffle, and my Nike Waffles had over 1,000 miles on them, and they were like slippers. They did not protect me from shock, but my body had already acclimated. My calves and my bones, they could take the shock of running 5 miles, 10 miles, whatever. But these shoes that they sell now with the air in them and the fillers and the foams, you're not moving your foot as you should. And I remember years ago, people would frown on flip-flops and flimsy little leather sandals like the Greeks used to wear, and they'd go, oh, those have no support. Those are terrible. But the fact is, when you have shoes with no support, like barefoot, that's no support. Your body, your feet, the muscles, they have to like get with it, and they have to move you, support your weight. All the bones and all those tendons and all the connective tissue has to learn to flex and move, and that's what translates that energy into the flow of your being, translates the earth's energy. So you're exactly right. The rubber shoes and the puffy shoes and the stiff shoes and all the boots and things that people wear today, like police boots, there's no way that you're going to be able to flex like you should. There's no way that your chakras are going to be relaying movement that converts to energetic content to all of your different body parts.
Right, and we were born without shoes. I mean, shoes is a man-made creation, and what a lot of women, what's their mantra is to buy shoes. I mean, it's been another meme that's been inserted into our society, and we put those women on these high heels so their legs look longer, and men find them more attractive. And what does that do? I mean, all we do is modify what nature so beautifully gave us. I mean, I work the running. I crew for a buddy of mine who runs the 100-mile Western States, and there's Indian guys Native Americans that come up, and they run in barefoot 100 miles from Squaw Valley down to Auburn over 24 hours. And we're shoes are not necessarily needed if you build up your feet strong enough. When I got my feet strong from walking around on the dirt and whatnot for a while, I had my own shoes under my feet, and it's interesting, doing that. Your feet are dirty, but but I felt so connected to Earth. I felt as soon as I felt like I was always connected to this vibrational frequency. And Tesla's famous line is everything's frequency, vibration, and energy. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And so to disconnect us from the source is to disconnect our higher consciousness. And what I get from this, Sophia, is they're so damn afraid of us waking up that they have to do everything in their power to keep us asleep, whether it be social devices, putting rubber under our feet, spraying us with all these different, formaldehyde or, mind altering stuff in the sky they're able to do to adjust our frequency vibrations. They're afraid of us. And so when we wake up like we're waking up, that's a power they can't control. And so they're desperately trying more and more to increase it. But as you see on the internet, the world's waking up. I don't know if we're going to have enough time given the weather, what's happening with the weather, but excuse me, there's a whole higher consciousness that is waking up right now. And I think that transfers into the collectiveness of everybody's consciousness. And we're waking up in a very profound way.
Your dog is waking up. He got really excited by what you were saying. So, Jamie, what I see them trying to do is to fragment us and chop us up. They don't want the flow of energy, whether it's the Earth's energy or our own energy, to be operating properly in us, because they don't want us to be able to say no. They want us to acquiesce, to succumb, to concede, to yield to what they offer us. And they operate in the Hegelian framework. They will give us something, and then there will be some people who won't like it, and then they'll say, okay, well, let's just compromise and let's give you this instead. And everybody will go, oh, yeah, thanks for thinking of us. And they create this, left-right paradigm and these different factions in order to compete for and build toward the compromise. But they really don't want us to flat out say no. They always want us to compromise in these gradients that take us toward their end goals. And so if our energy was moving through us properly, we might actually say no. We might say, no, I don't want the Samsung Galaxy, the newest one. I don't want this. I don't want that. I don't want to be in a driverless car. No, no, thank you. Goodbye. And we don't say that. And the successive generations are being trained and enculturated to believe that these innovations are absolutely fantastic, miraculous. And this is what television also helped us to get used to, that we would welcome new developments in technology, in commerce, I mean, everybody was mesmerized by the motion picture, and I did a newsletter on this recently where I reported on something I learned that I didn't know before, that in the days of the Nickelodeons, where these theaters would show these short films, people were in a trance. They would drop in their nickel to watch the little short film, and as soon as it was over, they'd go back out, drop in another nickel, and go back in and watch it again, because they were fascinated by the two-dimensional world moving in front of them. They had only seen the three-dimensional world moving. Now here was a completely new thing. It was people moving and talking in 2D, and they were observers. They felt like flies on the wall. They felt like they had an omniscience to them. That's what the idea of watching a film does to you. You are in these people's lives, the actors. You suspend your understanding that this is all being acted out, and you get to be omniscient. You watch everything. You have what I call nose hair tight viewpoint. You never would get that close to anybody in real life unless it was your lover, and even then you wouldn't see their face enlarged. You wouldn't experience their emotions in that larger than life way. So this created hypnosis in people, and they would do anything to experience that because it was out of this world. It was out of this consciousness.
Right. The whole thing about energy and vibration and frequency, you think about a television, what does it broadcast? It broadcasts a frequency. You look at a TV in the slow motion and you see the flicker rate. Well, they've been adjusting and adapting the flicker rate technology. So the devices are two-way communications. And we all know they read our emails and they all know they listen to our phone calls. But what we were just describing is flicker rates where they actually adjust the brain patterns through brain stimulation flicker rates. And I did a piece on that in my Taboo blog. And it's one of the highest rated hits I get on it because people are beginning to understand these devices are meant to control it. And I take it one step further, Sophia, in that they want us to desire it. They want us to ask for it. And so they get us to ask for it. And then they, like this new one, what's it called? The Echo and the Home and the Nest and everything, where you bring in this device into your home and it listens to everything going on in your house. I mean, now we're going to have to get on a plane. We're going to have to get biometric IDs. I'm not going to fly anymore. And these are the decisions that waking up has to be. We have to give up a lot of this convenient technology that's being introduced to us in order for us to literally keep our minds. And so by this invasive species, I call it, of technology, you have to be waking up. But when you wake up, it's really hard to break away. And that's why moving to a farm, growing my own food, it's really, you're going to have to turn away from the societal norm, but watch everybody else just fall into this continually. And it's like you take a pill and all of a sudden you can have better sex. You push a button and something shows up. You watch TV and your mind gets programmed. It's really invasive throughout the entire social spectrum of our culture around the world now. So to break away is hard, but if you're going to make it through these next periods of time, like I don't vaccinate my son and I get all sorts of grief for that, but my son is now 11. He hasn't been sick at all. And he might be one of the last children that is back in the old days when normal was a healthy child without, building his own immune system without chemical modifications and vaccines. So I don't know where we're going. It scares me with my son to see where the future is. But as we wake up, we're going to have to make more choices to break away and to set examples of going back to the land, to getting grounded to the earth, to respect Mother Gaia as a living entity, and to show some reverence for instead of treating Earth as a supply house and a sewer exclusively, we have to start being conscious that people that make our smartphones, they're having to put suicide nets in China, so the people that work 7 days a week from 15 years old in China to make our smartphones don't jump off 5-story buildings to kill themselves to make our smartphones. I mean, the consciousness rising has to occur inside of us. And I don't think the world's going to change, but changing our consciousness inside of us is what's all it's all about. And then as we emanate that higher consciousness and higher vibrational frequency, the world will resonate in a higher frequency as well. We're that powerful of being. I mean, I believe we still can't figure out how they built the Egyptian pyramids and putting up 2.3 million stones in 40 years that weigh tens of tons in such geometric perfect proportions that we today still can't figure out why they did it and how they did it. Well, they used mind over matter technology. They are of higher consciousness. They were before the Kali Yuga period, and we're just coming out of the Dark Ages. We're only 500 years out of the Dark Ages. We're just beginning to wake up, and it's a very exciting time, but it's also very daunting in going into the age of Aquarius, and that is very Saturnian. It's the hard lessons learned, wake up or take the consequences. And so I just, I know we're getting towards the end of this here, but I really want to say, Sophia, you've woken me up a lot. I listened to your first podcast back on the Sandy Hook false flag, and that was excellent. And I've just been such a big fan of yours, and I've really been honored to be on your show. It's just wonderful to meet you and get to know you.
Well, Jamie, you're very welcome, and likewise, I think it's great to have these connections, and we get to have them because we contact each other for radio shows, but I know the listeners feel connected as well, and I appreciate them so much, all of you, so much, because I do get the occasional email, and people are responding from their hearts, and that's very, very obvious and very clear to me, and it's a great gift to learn that, to feel that from my perspective. So thank you to everyone who writes and who expresses what they've learned or how they've been struck by a show or a piece of information that I've put out. And Jamie, you too, you're very, very productive. You have all these sites. I didn't know you had 2 other websites in addition to A Plain Truth. But as we finish here, would you tell us about the geoengineering book and where to get it? I assume it's out now, right?
Yeah, it's out there on Amazon. It's called Geoengineering, aka Chemtrails, because there's a whole controversy whether chemtrails language should be used in the legal community or not. So it's titled Geoengineering, aka Chemtrails, and Humanity's 6th Great Extinction Event, which we're in the 6th Great Extinction Event when you see the die-off going around the world. And one thing I'd just like to say to all the listeners and stuff who are waking up, once we get this information, as you're doing, as I'm trying to do, it becomes our responsibility. I'd say it becomes our duty as citizens or humans on this earth to wake others up. And that's probably the hardest thing to do. Hardest might be getting all this information and understanding the dynamics of how dark and dire this all is. But then we have to wake up 7 billion other people in our service to humanity. And that's what you're doing with your show, and I'm trying to do with my blogs and my YouTubes. And so I encourage everyone just to speak out, speak your truth. You're going to get a lot of grief. You're going to get a lot of blowback. You're going to be, talked about tinfoil hats. It's been going on for years, but I am so seeing a waking up here, especially in Northern California now with Trump in office. People are talking about geoengineering. They know about the word chemtrails. They're beginning to, 5 years ago, I couldn't have discussions I'm having with people now. It's really an exciting time to be talking to others, getting together in small groups, sharing information, getting on your site, getting on my sites, getting these books, and just saying, hey, did you know this is going on? Or have you heard about this? And maybe give them a book or give them your podcast and help promote the great awakening that's going on. This information hasn't been available for forever. The internet is giving us exclusive information that we've never had the opportunity for a worldwide consciousness rising. So while the internet is still around, while books are still available, I just encourage everybody to download, but then you have to wake up others. And, I really honor your service that you're doing to others, Sophia. So selflessly. It has to be selflessly. You can't attach an outcome that they're going to get it and they're going to understand, or that they're going to react in the way you want them to react. It's just putting it out in the right way, and maybe someone else will bring it up and then they'll look into geoengineering, but you planted a seed in their heads. And that's what I try and do, is just plant some seeds. And if they want to take it up, fine. If they don't, I don't own attachment to whether they're going to quote unquote get it or not. I'm just trying to present as much information, relevant, honest, researched as I possibly can, because I care and I know you care. And so everybody that's listening cares. Let's try our best to get the word out, and let the cards fall where they may, but it's all you can do.
Yeah, and we have to do it with a good spirit. Your energy reflects a good spirit, even though it might be frustrating, and we feel a lot of frustration and, a sense of being not able to make the difference that we think we should make. And, it's up to everyone. This has probably some correlation with the advertising formulas, in that people buy after 5 to 8 exposures. So they're going to hear it from us, they're going to hear it from someone else, maybe their neighbor will mention it, maybe see something, a bumper sticker even, and what they would have poo-pooed at one time, the more they're exposed to it, the more they figure, okay, maybe I've seen this all over the place, maybe there's some meaning to it. And then we never know, Jamie, it may be really just a switch in their consciousness, that they take a zig or a zag, and suddenly what they saw so many times and they dismissed, it makes a whole new kind of sense to them. And if you're seeing that happen en masse, as I hear other people say, then that's a good thing. But I tend to be more pessimistic. I say, hey, there's so much conversion in the other direction that even though there's a waking up, the numbers aren't catching up with the other numbers. But I do believe that this is a qualitative, not quantitative movement. The quality of my knowledge is deepening. My philosophies about this have deepened as well. And I think that's what we experience on the journey. We experience a deepening of personal philosophy and a lessening of despair and negativity. That's what I'll just say for myself. So Jamie, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. I have had a great time, and you are very, spirited and energetic as a guest, and I hope people will visit your website. Go and have a look at your book on Amazon. Be inspired to buy it, because I know when you do something, you go whole hog, you dive into it, and you do a very thorough job with a lot of copious information. So it's going to be a good resource. So I'll put links up to everything and write a nice show description, and hopefully you'll send me a picture of yourself as well.
Yeah, I will do that, and thank you for having me on the show. And I'll just end. I just got here on next to my computer. I have some inspirational quotes, and one is Friedrich Nietzsche, and it quotes, it says, "I tell you, one must have chaos within oneself to give birth to a dancing star." I think we're all destined to be stars in our own right. So seek your own chaos to find your star, but it's unsettling, but it's also a time of the mind. The Aquarian age is a time of the mind. And so this is the mind expansion, and meeting people like you, Moving the Sticks, and Mike Williams, and some of these other people doing yeoman's work, not getting paid. We're not making any money on this, folks. We're doing it all out of the goodness of trying to wake up as many people as we can. And even if that's just one more person that we can bring down the road as we've gone down the road, I think it's worth it. I think that's what where work is supposed to be right now.
Yes, it is. I couldn't have said it better. So thank you, and thank you everyone for listening, and we will see you again soon. Hey everyone, this is Sophia. I want to tell you about iodine, which I've been selling on the website avatarproducts.com. That's my online store. Iodine is a mineral that the body needs pretty much more than any other mineral. Iodine goes to every single cell in your body. It's crucial for reproductive system organs. It's crucial for the thyroid. The thyroid makes 4 hormones. It can't even make them without iodine. And what has happened, we've started to make thyroid hormone out of bromine, fluorine, and chlorine because they resemble iodine so closely as molecules. So we're getting brominated thyroid hormone, chlorinated thyroid hormone, fluoridated thyroid hormone. And those hormones regulate so many different systems in the body. No wonder we're falling behind in our cellular detoxing and housekeeping. So if you visit avatarproducts.com, you're going to see 3 different kinds of iodine. you can get a trial size for only a few dollars, 1/4 ounce, and that's a good place to start. So help yourself and feel better. Reminding you, visit avatarproducts.com where you will find a number of things that I have discovered, or I've even designed in some cases, that have solved problems for me. Visit avatarproducts.com.
Banking I think they made $77 billion printing money at interest in 2012 profits for the U.S. government. And we're under this system of absolute control. And I just moved to the country back in 2007 because I wanted to start growing my own food, knowing where food came from. I wanted to give my son a life where he knew where things came from. He could grow his own food, our own water, our own energy. So we've been living on a ranch, growing our own food and just trying to be self-sufficient and self-reliant and not have as big a carbon footprint, because I realized once I decided when my son was born in 2005 that I needed to see a better way than destruction of Earth at all costs for profit. And we just moved to a farm so we could grow our own food and live self-sufficiently. And I just started really getting into world events and realizing that the control system has been in place for a very long period of time, and that the powers that be use deception, subliminal programming through our screens, our social devices, to set memes in our minds. But on the other hand, there's this whole shadow government, other world that you and I have been exposing now for years, that the world is waking up to. And it's very exciting times. It's very scary times, but it's also very exciting times.
Now, Jamie, I'm just going to mention to listeners that I'm hearing a little bit of a speech pattern thing going on, which could be your computer, but every few words, some word will...
Trading, one of the senior partners brought me up to the seventh floor bar after the close of the stock exchange and gave me some advice about how Wall Street works. And he's holding his scotch and like he's held it every day since he's been to work there after work, and said, "Son, teach you a couple things about Wall Street. You got to know, in Wall Street, you either pray or you're prey. You pray or you pray, P-R-E-Y, or you pray, P-R-A-Y. And then the second thing he said is you need to know is that in Wall Street, you're either at the table or you're on the table." And, I grew up in competitive sports, and so getting into Wall Street was kind of a natural fit in competition. But when I realized as I worked further into the trading, I was an institutional sales trader in New York, and then I moved to San Francisco in 1991 and worked for a firm called Robertson Coleman Stevens Investment Banking, which became Robertson Stevens Investment Banking, which got sold to First Boston, and I think Bank of America absorbed them later. But we were doing all the four horsemen that were doing all the technology, healthcare, Wi-Fi build out, all those kind of things in Silicon Valley. We were based in San Francisco. So we were at the cutting edge of a lot of the new technologies coming out. So I got a lot of experience with initial public offerings and seeing a lot of new companies. We brought Genentech public and some of these other companies. And so I got to see a lot of the insiders. But until I started investigating for myself about how the world really works and who's behind the scenes, I never really understood the dynamics of money. And one thing I understood after I got out of Wall Street is our debt is we were in a one world government. My second site is called A Plane, Plane, truth.info. And that deals more with the recent subject of flat Earth and our heliocentric versus geocentric history. And then I have a smaller one for vaccines. It's called AVV, Apple Victor Victor Ida.info, Anderson Valley Vaccine Information. And it's just a general information about what's in vaccines and up to date on all the vaccine information. So it's just trying to get the word out and inform people. And I spent 25 years working on Wall Street in finance. And last 10 years, I've just been reading and studying and really trying to figure out why the world can't get any better and why we can't fix things. And even though everybody wants peace in the world, why we can't have peace, and just started getting into the rabbit hole like you have. And the onion got, the layers of the onion got so much bigger than I ever dreamed of. And here I am, 10 years later, and we're still finding new discoveries like we're going to talk about today.
Jamie, I never worked on Wall Street. So tell me what that was like. Tell me, first of all, what did you do? What did you do? Did you do the same thing? Did you do different things? Who did you work for, and what was it like?
I started in 1985 in the New York Stock Exchange as a clerk for a relatively small investment banking firm called Furman Sells, Mager, Dietz, and Burney in New York City. And so I worked down on the floor for a year learning how trades work. And very interesting sidebar quickly, the first few days of trade. This is Sofia Smallstorm. I am welcoming today a guest that I haven't had on my podcast before, and he is Jamie Lee. He is actually quite versatile. He has, as I have, gone into many different directions. So our discussion today may take different paths and byways, but I think you'll find it very interesting. So welcome, Jamie. How are you? I'm great, Sophia. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, of course, it's my pleasure. We've had some very good talks, and I have listened to a few of your shows as well with the Sage of Quay, and I think you've plumbed a lot of material, and you put out more posts on your website than anyone. They're like flooding in all day long. So tell us your website.
Well, I have three websites, and I started the first one back, I think, in 2010 called Taboo, TABU blog. It stands for Towards a Better Understanding, tabublog.com, and it's a general kind of what's going on in the world. And the way we know that is our debt goes with us everywhere around the world. Wherever you go in the world, your debt will follow you, except for three countries. And I wonder, Sophia, you can name those three countries where it's not bank. There's called the Bank of International Settlement in Geneva, Switzerland, run by the Rothschilds, who are also the bankers to the Vatican. And all banks, including the United States Federal Reserve, which is a private corporation, clear their finances every day through the Bank of International Settlement, except for three countries. And I wonder if you could name those three countries.
I don't want to test. I know about BIS, BIS. So I would guess one is
Right.
North Korea.
North Korea, Syria, and Iran.
Yeah, I was going to say Syria, and then of course we have Ahmadinejad and all of his government. So those seem to make the most sense. And is it true that the axis of evil that Bush named way back were the 6 countries that didn't settle through BIS?
You're exactly right. The other three were Libya, I forget the exact six, but Libya, Afghanistan, and Iraq were previously on that list. So you can see what's happening in world events and why it's happening, to get everybody under a centralized banking system before we go to a no currency electronic monetization, if you want to call it that. And we're well on our way to that now. So when I got in out of Wall Street and I started looking at the whole capitalist capitalizing system and realized that the 10% that controlled the world wealth was going to get down to 1%. And we're past that now. And we're seeing the ramifications of printing money at interest, which the Federal Reserve private